and welcome to another Buried in Treasure learning community session. We are moving along at a rapid pace, so we're in chapter 9 today. That's going to be our focus, really sorting and removing stuff, getting ready.
Actually, wait a minute. I need to.
So we're going to move through that element of getting into the action phase. And if I can quickly remind folks, kindly mute yourself if you are not engaging directly with your colleagues or facilitator. Just want to make sure that we are able to get the best from the audio element of it. So thank you for that. But so we're going to get into the action phase, or getting ready to really take action as to how and the best modality approach for really sorting and removing stuff. Because at the end of the day, this is all about getting into that place where we're able to take action to manage and to really manage our stuff so that we're able to benefit from the environment and the state of our living environment in a way that we intend, and we can actually live in a meaningful, tangible way. So it's really about taking action to reduce and manage our collection of stuff and our possessions to a point where, like I said, we can live and flourish in a manner in which we desire and intend. So let's quickly establish the reminder that today's meeting is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. And as we normally expect, there's an interaction, a lot of interaction, and ready to get your participation so you can share your experiences and ideas and thoughts about how to really manage possessions and stuff, and how to really mitigate or to really ameliorate any particular issues that relates to hoarding. So we want to make sure that you're on spot on and you're kind of bringing your take to it so that we can make meaningful strides and efforts to take action.
If there's anything I can help with.
Please be reminded that the slides and the recording will be made available to you through TBHR. So please let me know if you're receiving that so you can maintain engagement. As you know, the schedule is really on a monthly schedule, and our next session will be on October 24th, and we'll be focused on chapter 10. So we're at chapter 9. We've kind of gone through that process of understanding hoarding, where the challenge of hoarding may be impacting our lives, and really how the way we think and the way really internalize our connection and relationship to our stuff really impacts our behavior in terms of how we manage that stuff and how it impacts our functionality across all the domains of our lives. So basic housekeeping, as you know, we expect you to participate. There's information provided to you about accessing the sessions via audio. If you are struggling with that, we expect, certainly if you have the opportunity to be on video, to do so. All the information is there. The Zoom bar has the subtitle. You can access the subtitle if needed, and we strive continuously to make our material and our sessions as accessible to everyone. So certainly share with us if there's any questions in that regard. So we want to quickly review from our August meeting on reducing acquiring. We spoke at length about how we can best utilize our acquiring form to really track how we really either collect stuff or purchase stuff and really bring it into our possessions that impacts the state of our environment. And we wanted you to explore a recent acquiring episode to see what that's like, really look at the advantages and disadvantages worksheet in terms of collecting possessions, and really look at the non-acquiring help card that we ask you to either provide to your clients or use for yourself, so it can give you a sense as to when you're faced with that temptation to acquire things, to really look at your goals and how the effort and action of acquiring or not acquiring that stuff impacts your overall goals. And we shared with you a learning application. We wanted you to try using some of those assessment tools and give us some feedback in this session as to generally how helpful or unhelpful or challenging it was, and what has been your experience with attempting to use those tools. So if any one of you are up to it, I would love to hear someone share if they've attempted to use those tools, or in the recent month or so, what has been your experience in terms of really helping someone look at the advantages and disadvantages of acquiring items. Now, what is a recent episode of acquiring look like for you or for the person that you're supporting? Has anyone had a chance to try to use some of the assessment tools or some of the particular approaches or strategies to really gauging your acquiring behavior?
I believe it was the last session we had talked about like people acquiring for like comfort reasons, and I had the realization that I keep all the manuals to all the things that I have, even ones that like I don't use anymore. And I
Just in
had
case, right? Just in case.
just in case, right? And then I actually brought this up to my trauma therapist, and we set a goal to go through them and get rid of the ones that I don't have. And being able to like have that awareness, and then someone to walk through that process with me regardless of the outcome, super helpful. And yes, I got rid of like a whole bunch of manuals. It was fantastic.
Fantastic, Sabrina. I love to start with a successful feedback. That's fantastic. Great to hear that. And I'm sure you're not alone in that regard. You know, so many of us have manuals or guidebooks or stuff with instruction. I've had something I think they've been using for like 2 years, and I've never read the guidebook, but I have it. It's spanking new, still in the plastic. Someday I think I'm going to read it, and I'm like, I've been using this stuff backwards and sideways, use it in so many different ways. Do I really need that? But it's just that sense, like you said, of some measure of security that we should have in case something goes wrong. We have the guidance as to how we should fix it or how we should use it. But that's a great example. Great to hear that. Anyone else had the opportunity to use one of the tools, or is even consider using it, and may have some measure of anxiety or uncertainty about the how and why and when to use it? I'd certainly like to kind of have a discourse about that. Well, certainly, if you haven't had the opportunity as yet, but would like to explore that, please take the opportunity in the coming weeks or so to try one of the assessment tools, particularly the acquiring form. Really lays out, you know, a step-by-step approach, or to take a look at the advantages, disadvantages worksheet. I think Sabrina alluded to that. It's very helpful in terms of really helping you gauge the importance of acquiring something or holding on to it. So you are definitely encouraged to try to use those tools and get a sense as to how it may apply to your particular case. So let's roll on. So what's our objective today? What's the learning objectives, or what is the takeaway you want to get from today's session? The hope is that you're able to recognize those common challenges to getting started. What is the jumping off point? What is that platform that person needs to use to really get from considering taking some action to reduce hoarding to really engaging in that behavior, that action of really sorting and discarding stuff? What is that? What is the challenge, that first step? You want to examine guidelines for problem solving, because once we get into the action, there's a likelihood that we'll experience obstacles and things we have to overcome. We want to be in a situation where we are armed and geared up to really have a tangible, meaningful problem-solving approach to attack or to address those obstacles. You want to outline strategies for sorting and organizing. What are the tested, proven approach and action that will be taken, that we should take in order to make some significant inroads into sorting and organizing our stuff. And then ultimately, we want to look at what's going to keep us on that trajectory, what's going to be the reward system we're going to use to stay on target, stay on track, and to keep us motivated, moving in the direction of really organizing and discarding stuff and keeping our environment free of that level of hoarding that really impedes our general functioning. So it may be ambitious in a sense, but I'm hoping that we can at least get some meaningful takeaways from that effort today. So that's where we're starting. That's what we're hoping to really achieve today. Does that make sense? Does that seem purposeful to you? Is that hopefully something that you can wrap your hands around and take with you subsequent to today's session? Or am I dreaming here? Am I asking too much? Am I too ambitious? Let me know. Said, all right, I think I can only tackle 2 of those things. Then that's fine. But please feel free to share. But that's our objective for today. So hopefully we'll get there. So we are in, like I said, the preparation determination stage. And I don't know how many of you may be familiar with the stages of change, but this preparatory stage, determination stage, is a critical one. Because this is really the area where people move from contemplating change to really putting things in place for taking action, for making that change. So the preparation, like as we know, we have to prepare in order to take meaningful action that is going to lead us to where we want to get. And that basically, that stage of change really follows the contemplation where we're kind of processing all that information. Now we want to really have a concerted idea, a plan, a level of confidence, a level of competence, and a level of awareness as to why this is important and what we want to do about it. So we're really speaking to a commitment to change, right? A really conscientious consideration and readiness to really engage in that change. And some of the primary action that needs to be taken in this stage is to really identify appropriate strategies. The what, the how. We know the why, we're now looking at the how. And the what is it that we need to do? So you're talking about weighing the pros and cons, all the risk rewards analysis, right? And finally helping us to really tip the balance in favor of change. So you're moving from status quo to really taking some action. Even though in some instances, even at this stage, some ambivalence, all the ambivalence is not gone, right? We're still having some background noise telling us that maybe it's too much, it's a little too hard. But we have a sense that we value what is it we need to change. It's important to us. We're ready to do it. We have a sense as to how we should do it. It's just about taking that next step. So that's what today is about, really gearing ourselves up for getting into that action phase. What we need to discern clearly, though, is whether or not simply a commitment to change is enough to make a realistic plan. Being aware that the change needs to be made, having a commitment to making it, is it enough to really create a realistic plan of change? And I certainly want to get your perspective about that. Great point, Christina. Really being able to visualize the goal, right? What is it going to look like when we've achieved what we desire to achieve? And Heather says you can be committed to change, but if you don't know the steps to take it, it might cause a freeze in action. Fantastic, spot on. The reality is, even though we may make the commitment and have that sense of readiness, a commitment to change without appropriate skills and activities can create a fragile and incomplete plan. You have to have some realistic way of assessing the level of difficulty that may come with sorting, organizing, and removing your possessions, right? And you have to have a plan. You have to have a way of visualizing your action, formulating your action, determining or anticipating some obstacles, preparing for those obstacles, and having some problem-solving skills to address them when they arise. And Sabrina's correct. Oftentimes, the unknown can create some fear and keep us frozen or keep us in inaction as opposed to action. So we need to have more than just a commitment. We need to have a plan, and we need to have that sense of know-how to get there. So we want to look at how do we get from preparation to action? How do we get from knowing what we need to do, feeling good about it, to actually taking action? So when we speak of the preparation stage, we're talking about a commitment to taking action soon, but working on a change plan. Then we think of the action stage of it, which is actively taking steps to change, but oftentimes it takes some time. So it's not stable in the immediate of action taking. It's a sustained effort. We've got to keep at it, right? Keep our shoulders to the wheel. So it's important to note that there is that continuum, that there's that transition from preparation to action that is going to be needed for us to get to a place where the environment that we live in or occupy has demonstrated efforts to show for sorting and organizing so that we can begin to use more and more of the environment in the intended way. And the collection of our possessions is done in a way that doesn't impede our functioning day to day. And that's what's critical about what is it that we need to do and how we do that. So what helps us make that shift? What are the strategies for really facilitating that shift from that mindset of, I know I need to do this, it's important to do it, I can see the benefits, I can visualize the goal, now how do I do it? There are some concrete steps and some strategies that can be used, right? We want to clarify the client's own goals and strategies for change. So it's really that person articulating it, formulating it in their own words, in their own thoughts. What is it that I am striving to do here? And that person may simply say, I want to repossess my home and not have things and possessions be the primary element of my life. I want to live. I just don't want to collect. I want to live. I want to have those things that I have be tools for me living purposefully, intentionally in my home. You want to have an option of change options. You know, you don't want a solitary means of doing it. You want to have some options. If you try this and this doesn't work, there's another option. You want to have some variations and variety to your options. You want to have that person find their own words, their own assertive way of articulating their intended change. So you want that person to be able to provide to you some feedback as to exactly what strategies they intend to take to make those changes. So that it's not a situation where you are the driver of the change. You are that person's coach, guide, cheerleader, but they have a clear understanding and can articulate the change that they intend to make and how they plan on doing it. You want to consider and lower barriers for change. So if the effort is really to make some change, to organize my tools, you want to have a situation where, at least facilitate that person being able to set some clear demarcations as to, if I encounter this particular problem, if I come across, my 4 electric saws that I have, and I start feeling that sense of uncertainty about how to prioritize one or get rid of the other, you have a sense of, okay, you look at it, and I think similar to what Sabrina was saying, you look at it and say, okay, I'll look and see the newer saws or the one with most versatility, and I'll keep that one. Because the others that I have from the 80s may not actually be equipped to do the job today. So I look at the newer ones, the ones with the most versatility, and those are going to be my priority items to keep when it relates to saw. So have some sense as to how to prioritize and differentiate the most meaningful, tangible way. You want to ensure, or you want to at least be talking about natural supports that person can access and engage with. Because as we know, having supports, diverse supports, really give that person a greater sense of confidence and competence to really engage. Interesting. Someone said, I think that sometimes older ones can hold sentimental value to them as well. Absolutely. We've talked about those emotional attachments, right? And that does not prevent us from making practical decisions. So there may be a case where we say, okay, I can hold on to a new one and one that has sentimental value. So I have that balance. So there's options of doing that, but that's a great point. So enlisting supports is going to be also important, because sometimes we need to hear from a person we love and care about or trust, that person keeping us on track, that person supporting us through that process. Because there'll be days and moments and times where you'll really question your ability to succeed. And to have someone that you can look at or hear from, who you trust, who can say, yes, you can do it. I know this plan is important to you. We've talked about this. I'm here for you. What you need, let me know. So that kind of support is invaluable to getting people on the track of change and sustaining the change. And then to really explore the treatment or service expectations and the client's role. You want to make sure that the expectations of these efforts or this plan, this professional relationship, is reasonable and practical and applicable. And really, that person has a clear understanding as to what their role is in this process. So there's not a greater degree of dependence on you or their loved ones, but they have a clear understanding as to how their role is connected to other people's role in terms of support, and how that is going to really be in synergy to ensure that this is a sustainable effort. So these are some of the strategies to really help shift that paradigm from the preparation element to the action phase. You have to have that, and these support uncertainty, fear, potential obstacles that this really helps you to prepare not just for taking action, but to deal with potential obstacles and bugbears or limits that may arise when the action phase is in full element. So even though this may look to be very academic, it's important to really have it both at hand and to share it with your consumers or share it with your loved one, so that they have something to kind of reference when they're in the full phase of action, so it stops it really limits the, that getting into a point of action and then just stopping because of uncertainty or lack of preparation for dealing with obstacles and problem solving. We want people to be armed with a good array of skills, knowledge, and resources to help them through the difficult times of action. Because there will be obstacles to overcome. This is not easy. Otherwise, it would simply be addressed via some discourse. The action is challenging. So of these strategies, which one of them have you had the most success with, have you used when you're helping or supporting someone take action to address hoarding? Has any of these particular strategies come into focus or you used successfully? And that's fantastic, offering a menu of change. That's good. I mean, like, that's really great, because the more options people have, the more confident they feel about their capacity to not only do it, but to do it even in the face of odds or challenges. Christine says a menu of change options, definitely. If we were just talking about removing items, but sorting and organizing while removing, that helps so much. Absolutely. And it gives people that sense of empowerment, right? I can. I know that I can. And even if my first effort fails, I have another thing to try. So I'm not stunted by my first obstacle. And that's critical. Because as we know in hoarding, it takes multiple effort. It takes knocking down and getting up, dusting yourself off and getting back on track, because, and no pun intended there, but yes, it is stumbling over a lot of obstacles. That's when the pun is intended, right? It's struggling over those obstacles to get to your goals. Corey says, goal. How do you see yourself using this space ideally? Fantastic statement. That's really helping that person project themselves into that place where they have succeeded or where they see themselves succeeding. So they have a plan. So this is not just about responding to someone saying you have too much stuff, right? This is about taking that goal and making it a meaningful life event, an actual tangible way of existing and thriving. So the goal is more about living rather than just overcoming an obstacle. She said it's helpful to listen and then talk to them about the item too. Listen to the story behind it, and they're more likely to part with it after getting you to understand. Yes, there's some element of truth to that, in that if a person can truly share with you their connection and relationship to that item, it may be a little easier for them to part with it once they've been able to either identify a replacement emotion or a replacement connection that can be in that place. That is not a guarantee that simply because they discuss it with you, they're ready to get rid of it. There are some instances where the more you talk about it, the less likely people may be to discard it, because it takes them into that place where it just become part of who they are as opposed to an item. So we've talked about how to really shift that emotional connection and make it more practical and meaningful. So Leona asks, which strategy works best when there's time constraints and the clients are in a panic mode? Oh, I don't think there's an absolute answer to that one, because everyone, as we know, is very unique in their own way of coping, and also unique in their own way of really being in a panic mode. Panic mode may look very differently for different people. I think what's important when someone is in that stage of panic or uncertainty about it is to really give some pause and step back and really ask that person, what does this goal really mean to you? Because it's not about getting there. It's about the why. It's about the importance and value. And you need to get there first before that person can take action. So it may be just stepping back and saying, hey, you know, when we met first, you talked about the importance of having company again and using your living room in the way it's intended. Has that changed? So not get into, well, you haven't taken any action in 2 weeks. Just get them back to what was the first and the primary objective and goal of doing this anyway. But sometimes, like I said, it may be a case where that person has lost sight of the goal and just got so much into action that they lost sight of, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for me, or am I doing it for my counselor or my husband or my friend or whomever's driving the change action? So it's important to get people back there. And that's great. Just shared it her attempts. And if on a time constraint, I usually remind them as to why and kindly sympathize with them. Also express urgency and the reason behind it. That's a good way of looking at it, particularly if the effort to change the hoarding behavior may impact that person's ability to maintain residence, right? That's one of the critical areas. You want to actually not just pause and say, let's go back to why you want to do this, but to remind them of the urgency. If an inspection is in 2 weeks, yes, there's a level of urgency that we need to make some tangible changes because that person is coming to inspect really significant effort. So you need to get on the ball and really reassess what is it you can do. You may not be able to do all the things you plan to do today, but there's a few things that you can do. What can you do today, even when you're uncertain? So there may be a sense of urgency. Precisely, Corey, particularly when it comes to eviction and so forth, that's when, even within some distress or some uncertainty, action can be taken, or a plan for action can be taken. So good. I think people are spot on with that. So what are some of the challenges to making changes? Because as we know, if change was easy, we just give them a booklet that says, this is how you address hoarding, right? And all will be well. Or we'll just stop by and says, it looks terrible, it smells bad, you may want to make some change around that. That's not how it works. So we know there are going to be significant challenges. And we think of motivation and commitment to change. Is change possible and in my best interest? And people wax and wane around that even when they're moving in the direction of change. We've had instances where people have cleared out a few rooms or 1 or 2 rooms and still be uncertain. I don't know if I'm able to organize that kitchen. That kitchen has been that way for 10 years. I had no fire. I barely cook. I only use the microwave. So I don't know whether or not I want to get into all that stuff there, right? So even then, commitment and motivation can change. Or the person may say, listen, I don't use the living room anyway. So what's the point of putting any energy into that? Nobody visits me anyway, so why do I need a living room? Then you may want to go back to, well, when you started out this process, this change action, you talked about, the great tea set you got from your great aunt and the lovely table that you brought, the coffee table that you want to show off and all your collection of stuff. Has that changed, or have you felt a little different about that? So that you may need to kind of tease that out again to get that person back on the level of motivation about moving into a specific area that may be significantly challenging for them. Readiness to make a change. Do I possess the knowledge, skills, and resources necessary to successfully do it? And we've had instances where we know, ironically, there may be a consortium or collection of people who know other people who hoard. And sometimes what happens is a client of yours or a family member or loved one of yours may have seen in the most recent time, seen someone unsuccessfully attempt to do it. And that may impede their own motivation. Oh, hold on a minute. Jessie over there across the way, she has less stuff than mine. And all her family came and they tried, and the place is even worse. So what am I doing? That can happen. And you may want to help that person then revisit the reality that we're not talking about Jessie, right? Jessie's circumstances are not yours. Jessie may be able to do that, but Jessie owns her home and she has no risk of being kicked out. You, on the other hand, are renting this place. Eviction is in 2 weeks. We may want to visit your situation and differentiate it from Jessie. It's going to be important. So you want to establish those parameters because it's easy. Think of it. Things would not be the same if there wasn't some benefit to keeping it the way it is. There is a benefit to keeping things status quo. So we have to come in aware of that. Someone says, I know this isn't an extreme, but teenage sons like to keep garbage in his room. I tell him if he doesn't clean it up, he's going to get pests, and that usually gets a fire under him quickly. Giving the client or loved one some of the consequences can sometimes help them stay motivated. For some people, yes, that works. For most teenagers I know, if you tell them about pests in their room, they'll look at you like, and? So, isn't that your job, Mom, to come clean this room up? Because last I checked, if it's bothering you so much, then you can clean it because I'm fine with it. Once my console for my game and my desk is free, I'm good. The rest can go to hell in a handbasket. So you have to also know if that particular strategy works to motivate that person. It may not work for every single person. And teenagers, I think, come from a different planet. So they have a totally different set of expectations and realism that you have to be conscientious that it may not simply work for them simply because they should know better. Teenagers, and I'm not hitting, I'm not knocking teenagers, but we've all been there. We know our priorities are a little different from adults, right? When we're teenagers. But that's a good point. If it works for that person, fine. And developing a change plan is the next challenge. You know, it may be easy to say I want to do it, but the putting down the how and the why and the who may be more challenging. Because then if I write it down, I have to commit to it. And if I commit to it, somebody's going to hold me accountable. So moving from talk to plan may be difficult. Absolutely. And identify and dealing with the anticipated barriers. What are going to be my challenges? Am I going to be ready to take on those challenges when they arise? What can go wrong and what would I do then? I'm not certain what mood I'll be in, what mode I'll be in. You know, I may feel freaked out by, you know, recognizing that I took on more than I could handle. So there's a lot of challenges in that regard in terms of anticipating barriers. But sometimes it's the old saying, even though you can prepare, you have to cross that bridge when you reach it, right? You don't want to be so focused on what can go wrong. I have a set of tools, I'll get there. When I get there, I know that I have some sense of it. Or even if I get there and I'm not certain, I have this person to reach out to, that person to reach out. I have a lot of expert resources at my access so I can actually reach out. I don't have to fear the unknown. The unknown is anticipated. I'm going to be prepared to handle it. So these are some of the potential challenges to making a change. It's important to note and be prepared for them in a sense. So what we do is we really look at, there's some strategies that match specific state of change and have shown to work for some people. So for most folks. So when we talk about folks in the contemplation or preparation stage, what we found helpful and meaningful and tangible to helping people move to change action is motivation and education. Helping people find that internal motivation and also getting access to external motivators that can sustain them through the process. And really educating them on the strategies and approaches that they can use, the knowledge and skills that they can use to take change action, to prepare and anticipate and deal with problems, and to remain focused on the task at hand. So there are different strategies, evidence-based strategies that really work for specific stages of change. And that's going to be important to kind of be aware of. Because when someone is in that stage of preparation, you don't want to push them too quickly or push them too hard. You don't want to engage in activities that are not concomitant with that specific stage of change and that specific stage of readiness. You want to make sure they're aligned properly. So that's important to note. And really looking at the activities and strategies that are associated with a specific stage of change is helpful, so that you're using the appropriate intervention to match the person's stage of change. Does that make sense? And for those who've done our golden thread and our order tradings, I could imagine people bombarded this in your head about stage of change and specific strategies to really address them. So, but this is important to kind of have as a tool. Any questions there? Very good. So ultimately, we get to that point where we're deciding if making a change is worth it. Because at the end of the day, if we can't surmise in our head the value and importance of making this change, or whether it's worth it, it's unlikely that we're going to focus energies on making a change. It has to have a sense of worth to us to yield our commitment. So how do you help someone decide if sorting and removing stuff is worth it? We use a decisional balance. We help that person look at a payoff matrix, right? If I give this, what am I going to get? And if I take this action, what is going to happen otherwise in my life? And it's kind of ironic because both Crystal and I were in a training earlier this morning where this was the focus of it. Where it was like, we want to give people that ability to really assess and evaluate all the things that come with making a change. Because one of the things that is seldom discussed when people think of making a change is, what am I going to lose when I make this change? Because oftentimes all we think of is, what am I going to gain? What's going to be better? What's going to happen, tangibly for us when we make a change? But as we know, or we ought to know, or we will know from this moment on, any significant change that is made from the status quo is going to require us, if we gain something from a change, there's something we're going to lose. And it may simply be losing the status quo, but there's something to lose, right? Because I always say to folks, think of it, if you win the lottery, the first thing you're going to have that's going to be fearful and that's going to come as a way of losing is that you're going to lose some of those freeloading friends that you have, right? The minute you have those millions of dollars in your pocket, you start thinking of who should not be in my circle. So there's something to lose. Even if you get the most gains, there's always something to lose, but we'll look at it tangibly. So if we're thinking of making a change, we want to look at what's the pros and cons of not making the change. What are the benefits and the cost of not making the change? So if we don't address hoarding, if we don't strive to organize things, right? One of the benefits we have is more free time protected from feeling overwhelmed, right? We're free of worry. Things are just cool. I'm good. I don't have to look in that room anymore. I can close the door, right? So we have all the time to just focus on what is it we're currently doing. Now, what may be the cost of not changing that behavior? Your possessions will remain disorganized. You're unable to access your possessions. You may be stressed. You may have lost connection with your social connection because you're trying to keep people out of your home so that they don't comment on your environment, or you're so ashamed that you don't want people to come in and give their feedback on how your home looks. So there's always a pro and a con to not making the change. Does that make sense? When you look at what is it if I just stay status quo, if I don't make any change, what is going to be the benefit of not making that change and what is going to cost me for not making that change? It's important to know. And these are important things to discuss with the person you're supporting so that they can have a sense of that quadrant, so they understand what is it they're really buying into. Because sometimes we just tell that person, oh, if you clear up your home and you organize your stuff, your house will be fabulous. You'll be able to stay in your house. You're not going to get evicted. What you didn't tell them is about the overwhelming feelings that they're going to have when they're trying to make that change, right? And how if you're working on organizing your stuff, you're not going to have a lot of free time to do other things that you're accustomed to doing when you're not organizing. So there's always a pros and cons. So let's look at the pros and cons, or the benefits or cost of making that change. Number one, once we make that change, we know our possessions are going to be sorted and organized and easily accessible. That's the benefit of addressing hoarding. We get our stuff organized, things are accessible, space is available to us, we can use it in the intended purpose, we're able to live our lives meaningfully in all those dimensions. But even if we make that change and get those benefits, there are some shortfalls or things we're going to lose. We need to stay organized. We can't go back to our old behavior, right? We need to stay organized in order to keep it that way. We need to continue to discard some possessions because they're going to pile up unbeknownst to us in the same manner. And we always have to have that sense of, I can go back to that behavior that resulted in hoarding. There's a fear of relapse. I have to keep ahead of the relapse. So that's important to note, that there are pros and cons to taking action or not taking action. Leonis, that's so true. Really a hard time of balancing for me when I encounter clients in this mindset. I see this in most of my elderly clients living on their own without any family or friends, looking in on them, trying to put things into words. So it's critical and important. Lucy says, I know a person who doesn't clean because they have severe depression and some psychosis, which causes them to lose time in their memory, having their things out in garbage and projects in the unit shows proof that they have been doing things and time has been passing. This is very understandable, but it's also physically unhealthy at times. And so there's lots. We've been working on harm reduction, but it's hard to know how to approach it while avoiding existential crisis. The reality is sometimes, yes, you have to focus on harm reduction in the immediate and then try to tangibly move in a direction of really purposeful action that could lead, once again, to that person not exacerbating the problem, but have the readiness and preparation to deal with the problem as it is. So it's not getting worse while they're even contemplating taking action. So it's all very personalized to that person. One approach is not necessarily going to work for everyone. There's lots of mitigating factors and variables. Now, if someone is elderly and have chronic medical condition or serious mental illness, that may certainly impact your ability to really work on a plan that really requires a lot of processing, right? It may be more tangible. You may have to do more things visually, more things really with greater supports. So you have to really gauge how you're approaching this stuff before you even get started. Because the worst thing to do is to get on this automobile and then find obstacles that you weren't prepared for. And then you don't have the necessary linkage to the resources that the person needs. And the person then looks at you and says, you don't know what you're doing. How could you even help me, right? You need to make sure that you and them are working in tandem in a way that really prepares you for anticipated obstacles and go at the pace and the readiness the way that person is, and not try to push too far ahead of that person's stage of readiness. But a good place to start is really understanding the 4 quadrants of making any change, right? The pros and cons of doing so or not doing so that a person can't say, well, you didn't tell me that I'm going to have to give up this to keep this change, right? Or to ensure this happens. You didn't tell me now I have to talk about relapse prevention when we were talking about making the change. Well, relapse prevention is part of sustaining any change. So, and people have done it. You know, we can say, hey, here's a person that we know who, you know, was in your stage 2 years ago and have had some bumps in the road, but in a better place now and they've maintained it for the last 6 months. Maybe that's the person you want to have a discourse with, how they felt, what it was like, and how did they get past that initial fear of stopping. That's important to know. Deciding readiness for change. And we've talked about this, so we're going to even get into it in that sense. Readiness for change is just as critical as a commitment to change. You have to understand your priority. You have to understand what you can do and your willingness to do that, right? You have to be in that stage of readiness. And there's a way of doing that. We use what is called a ICR ruler, right? That importance, confidence, and readiness. It's one of those situations where you can use an example, like you're talking to someone and the person says, you know, you ask them how important it is for you to begin to organize your stuff and how confident you are that you can actually put them in the right place. And how ready are you to actually move things from where it is, put it into the recycle bin, take the recycle bin out to the curb for it to be picked up, and not go trifling through it again before that recycling truck come up. You have to have that sense and awareness. Now, the person may say, well, you know, you can ask that person on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, you know, not so ready, and 10 being very ready. How ready are you? The person may say, given the circumstance, Earl, I may be at a 5. Now, instead of saying a 5, why the heck are you not at an 8? Right? You don't want to go in that direction. You want to actually ask, well, I'm glad that you are at a 5. Tell me, why don't you think you're at a 4 instead? Person may be like, oh, hold on, Earl, I'm not that bad off. You know, I'm at a 5. I'm aware that I need to make these changes. I've already started doing something. So 5 is a decent one. Be like, well, that's fantastic. So tell me, given that you're at a 5 and not at a 4, what do you think it would take to get you to a 6 or a 7? Oh, well, typically once I do that, you know, I can't get the recycle bin to the curb. That's where the challenge lies, because I feel uncertain as to whether or not I'm throwing out my stuff. So what would it take for you to do that? Well, maybe I can just take it at night so I don't see the things, right? It's dark. I take it out, I put it out there, I run back in as quickly as I can because I don't want to be out there in the night. So maybe taking the recycle and garbage bin out in the night may work better for me. I don't feel that urge to go through it because I can't see nothing anyway. So maybe you'll be at a 7 or 8 if you're able to do it with a plan of doing it in the night. So really getting that person to shift the motivation and push them as gently as possible, more and more towards that change action, a tangible change action. So it's important to really gauge that person's importance of the action, their confidence about it, and their readiness to do that. And this is a tool that you can use to make that effort. And in preparing for a plan, we talk about commitment alone cannot get people in the direction of actually engaging in the effort. You have to have a plan. So we use a tool called the Change Plan Worksheet that really helps break down any change action into manageable, tangible, practical steps. What is the change I want to make? Right? The reasons why I want to make that change. The steps I plan to take. The ways other people can help me in my effort to make that change. I will know my change is working if I see A, B, C happening. Some things that potentially can interfere with my plan are fill in the blanks. And what will I do if the plan isn't working? What are my alternatives? What is that menu of strategies that I have? So you want sometimes, particularly for folks who may not have that sequential way of thinking or practical way of putting a plan in place, really break it down into these steps. So that when there is a level of uncertainty, the person can reference, go back to that and be like, okay, I now know exactly what it looks like if my plan is working or isn't working. And I know that I need to check in with myself or check in with the person to really revisit whether or not the strategy is the best strategy. So really having a change plan worksheet is helpful for folks to really articulate the plan, put it in a visible place, and really be able to access it when you're uncertain or hitting any kind of obstacles. So these are all tools to get people in that mode of making the change, shifting from the change talk to change action. And as we often know, and we've reinforced, developing your practice muscle, right? It's about, if you don't do it often enough, the confidence and competence and ability wanes. We have to be doing it. And when we talk about a change muscle, we're talking about the goal of doing 30 to 60 minutes of that change action per day. So if you only do 5 minutes, you need to do a few days, then move up to 10 minutes. Then the next week, increase it to 15 to 20. But we're striving to get that person to at least be putting in 30 to 60 minutes of action, because what we've seen by evidence, that is the rate at which you have to do it to see marked and significant, tangible, measurable change. And that's our practice muscle. Our practice muscle is like, the things we do consistently to give ourselves a reminder that we can. And get it to that level, that rate, that frequency, and that duration that really can result in tangible evidence of change. Because the toughest thing for people who hoard is if they don't see early successes and sustained successes, it is easy to give up. The motivation is already challenged. So you want to see change. So we talk about, if you focus on 30 to 60 minutes of doing something, at least you will see, I have sorted 10 items, I've put them where they need to be. I felt like I've accomplished something in today's session. So it gives me motivation to start again tomorrow, to get on action. I can pick up from where I left off tomorrow. So that's important to develop your practice muscles, to get into that mode of doing it constantly enough to see some tangible change, and also to getting yourself into the rhythm of taking action. Because change action is all about rhythm, all about keeping the pace, keeping things moving in the direction of change. So we'll talk in every stage of this change about developing your practice muscle, really getting yourself up to that level of activity that oftentimes provides evidence of significant movement and change in the positive direction. So it requires that level of engagement, 30 to 60 minutes, right? And you want to stay focused and managing your distractions, because distractions will come. So if you're working on that stuff for 30 minutes, instead of speculating as to whether or not you've reached 30 minutes, because I can tell you, if anyone is organizing, the first 5 minutes looks like 2 hours. Like, oh, yep, I'm done. And you look, it's only 5 minutes. So what you want is not to have that kind of uncertainty. So we ask people to use an alarm clock or set a timer to help stay on task and determine your time, right? Even though you may be watching over your shoulder every 5 minutes to see when it's gone, at least you have something that you're like, yes, ding, 30 minutes. I've kind of accomplished my task today. So that's important. Reduce distraction by turning off the TV. I don't know about you, but if I'm watching Law and Order, it's going to be very difficult for me to organize while things are happening. That's just me. It's very difficult to do. And if you're watching Family Feud and, the guy answering ridiculous questions, it's very difficult to focus on, should this go in this box or not? You distract. Steve Harvey can take you all in all directions. So you want to focus, want to reduce stuff, not have the TV on, or preferably not do it in your TV room, right? In a room where that distractions is limited. It's important to do that. Gradually increase the time slots of sorting and organizing. So you want to make sure you're progressively moving in that direction. Use a calendar to keep track of the things needed to be done. Schedule tasks. So you have a way of organizing your effort. So you can tick off and measure off your efforts and the gains while you're continuing to work on it. So it's important to really manage the distractions. Even though it may seem inconsequential, it is important to manage the distractions. And I know a few folks who've said, Earl, I'm able to do a lot more when I'm watching TV, because TV is just like white noise to me. And I asked them, so tell me about the show you watch. And they're able to tell me every single thing that happened on an episode. And I'm like, did you really focus on sorting? if you were doing it just kind of blindly, it's very difficult to really get the essence of what you're doing. So even though you may be able to work with distractions, you may not be able to be mindful in the task. And it's important to be mindful in the task because you want to gauge how you felt, what was the sensation, what was the emotion, what was the feeling, all that stuff. And that's difficult to do if you're distracted by some other external element. So that's important to note. Even if a person says, I can do it, like, you want to be mindful in this task. You want to know your smells and reactions and feelings and thoughts when you're processing the thought, the actual task. So it's important to know. Know when you're most alert and attentive. And this may be even more significant for folks at different age groups. We all have our peak periods in the day where we have the greatest level of energy and insight or motivation. And it's important to note them. Because what we find oftentimes is that people are less successful when they put certain tasks in a time of the day where they're not at their peak function. So Dr. Michael Bruce, actually the author of The Power of When, really spoke about the best time to learn something new is when your brain is in the acquisition mode, usually from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and again from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. Have any of you heard that? I remember that from studying. I just study for examinations. You're like, oh, I got my time. I could do it early in the morning, works for me, when the place is quiet or whatever. So you have to know when your optimum timing is during the day. And it may be different for different people. So there's a science to good timing. It's called chronobiology. It reveals that peak performance is hardwired into DNA, an inner clock embedded inside our brain that's keep ticking away and keep that perfect time since you were a baby. I learned that in doing this research. I'm like, wow, that's what that means. That makes sense. So there's actually, whomever created us actually created us with that kind of know-how and ability. So the researchers demonstrated that the best time to learn something new is actually 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. And I'm going to ask you, try it out. Because we don't just want to accept the doctor's word. We want to try it out, see if it works for us. Try it out. Try to see if you learn something new within that time. But the research has shown that that's basically what has consistently happened. The best time to make decisions, your cognitive powers are strongest 1 to 3 hours after waking up. Fascinating, isn't it? Now, that's not if you woke up when you went to sleep at the worst time of the day. So if you went to sleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to wake up around 8, that may not be the best time. We're talking about your normal sleep regimen. We're not talking about an off color time or off schedule time. The best time to brainstorm, moments of groggy greatness during this time, right and left brain can communicate. So we talked about the best time to really brainstorm is 1 to 3 hours after waking up. So once again, I say try it, but these are suggested time frames and even a consideration for people to make. Because some folks may tell you, listen, the best time for me to really think and process things is in the middle of the afternoon after I've had my turkey sandwich and my whatever. Everything is a top notch during that time. So you want to be able to put the most significant task at a time when the person has the greatest cognitive powers. You want to schedule the tasks that are going to be more laborious at a time when the person has the highest level of energy, right? You don't want them to have laborious tasks 6 o'clock in the afternoon when they're tired from the rest of the day. That doesn't make sense. You want to be able to correlate those timing with the energies and cognition as associated. So that's an important thing to note. I wanted to kind of just put that in. And what that leads us to is really scheduling things throughout the week. So you have this schedule, you put it on a place that is clearly visual, and you can visualize it so you know, hey, I'm organizing my clothing between 10 and 2 p.m. or from 10 to 11, and I'm doing some other task at a different time. So that you're not getting up every day saying, what can I do? Because what happens when someone doesn't have a schedule like this? They tend to resort to the most monotonous, inconsequential thing, right? And that often happens. You see that person that every few days, they're always taking out the garbage. But they're not taking any action about organizing things inside the house. Because taking out the garbage or taking out a few things and throwing it in the garbage can, you don't have to think about it. You have to process it, right? It's just like, he's been in the garbage, it's smelly, I'm putting them out. But other tasks may be more thought-provoking, require more processing, and you want to make sure there's a schedule at the time when you do it so you don't resort just to the simplest task, but the most important priority task for that day may be more critical. Problem-solving strategy, because what we know is that the best laid plans will have challenges and obstacles. And it's important for us to understand what exactly is the problem. We want to be very clear and specific as possible at what the challenge is that we're working on. Identify the problem. And there's oftentimes where those things are poorly defined or they're a well-defined problem, right? You think of an example of my life has gotten out of control. I have too many demands in my time and I can't do them well. Difference. Instead of you saying my life is just out of control, if I ask someone to tell me what's the solution to your life being out of control, that's a huge task. To say, oh, I'm just going to get my life under control. That's not easy. But if you certainly look at it from, I have a lot of demands on my time and I can't do them all, how do I address that? Okay, I look at what's my demands and I try to, reduce them or really adjust them in a way where the priority takes the top. So you're actually addressing it in a meaningful way. But a generalized problem is hard to really address. So another example is, oh, there isn't enough space in this place for me to spread out and get stuff organized. That's one of those, I call them definition of problems so that you don't have to sort a solution, right? It's one of those, if I say that, then everyone is going to back off and be like, yep, that's a lot. But there's a way of defining that differently. I need to find a way to sort my things in my little apartment. So you really identify the structure of the problem, you're holding on what it is. It's about really finding a way to do it. Not just saying it's out of hand and I can't do anything about it. So really defining the problem is going to be important to really taking action. So we look at it like that, out of control as opposed to too many demands. It's that balance. And really addressing it from that sense of there's too many demands. So we can reduce the level of demand, but it's hard to just regain control of everything. So you look at it from a more tangible, feasible approach. So there's always that balancing act that you have to play. And we need to look at brainstorming possible solutions, right? It's going to be critical for us to do that as we attempt to move in that direction. So we want to have lots of ideas. The first approach is to really have lots of ideas. You don't really worry about whether or not they're tangible. Just get the first set of ideas. Just brainstorm. Come up with some ideas. Don't worry about evaluating your ideas critically. Feel free to be creative. And remember, no idea should be considered as silly at this point in the process. So we start off with really just brainstorming. Want to get our thoughts flowing. Free association. Look at the list. And Helen gave us a list in the stuff we really talked about. Cancel some less important activities that I have planned. Really look at it in a really brainstorming phase. You want to get into that mode of feeling like you can activate your brain, but don't have to evaluate every single one of them. So you get bogged down with trying to, oh, that sounds good, but that's not a good idea. No, just throw out the ideas. That concept of throwing and see what sticks to the wall, that's what we're thinking about first. That's the first step we want to take at this point. So conceive as many possible solutions as possible. Then we want to consider and select practical options. So once we have those ideas that we brainstorm, we want to evaluate them, right? Determine which of these solution is feasible. Think about each possibility. Does it make sense? Is it feasible? And really then begin to narrow down and hone in on those that really have some practical, tangible, evidentiary kind of elements to them. Once we've done that, we want to start that kind of cognitive behavior strategy, really that cognitive reconstruction, right? What common negative thoughts stop us from trying something new? We want to start thinking about what really prevents us from taking the necessary action. And sometimes that means really that first thought that comes into our mind, we need to catch it. We need to ask ourselves that thought, what is that thought really is? And then we want to check it. Is it credible? Is it true? And the person thinks, oh, my life is totally out of control. There's nothing I can do. Is that really true? Is there nothing that you can do? Is your entire life out of control? Or is it just the hoarding situation? My kitchen has so much stuff that I can't use my stove in the way I want to use it safely and meaningfully. So you want to check it. You want to have that thought and then ask about its credibility. Check out to see if it's true. Is there evidence to support that first thought? And once we've been able to check it, then we can look at changing it, right? What is a more accurate and helpful thought? It may be, right now I feel overwhelmed by the amount of stuff in my kitchen, but I know that taking the stuff off the stove top is the first step to keeping things from going up in flames. If I remove things from the top of the stove that are flammable, the likelihood of me cooking and having a bonfire is reduced. So it's really about going through that process of restructuring those thoughts to really move from that catastrophizing to really meaningful way of looking at things and being able to see some feasible evidence that you can actually make that change. And try to select a solution. Once you've come up with some ideas as to what you can do, you want to implement it. Give the solution a try. Just thinking about the solution doesn't solve it, right? Just sitting there thinking, if I can just move all that stuff off the stove, I can go cook and not have to worry about a fire. Lovely thoughts. It takes action. You have to do something about it. You have to get up and actually remove those things. And once you take those things off the stove, you have to think about where you're going to put them. Where do they need to be organized? Where do you need to sort them? How do you get them? So it's going to be important to go through that process. In Helen's case, she listed the things that require her time, order them in terms of importance, then really look at the option. So it's going to be important to really look at it in a meaningful, tangible way, but you need to try those solutions. Once you've gone through that process of really looking at a thought and really looking at its credibility and really making that change, or thinking about the change, you need to put it into action and try those solutions. Determine whether or not it worked. You don't want to take action that you find feasible and practical, but you don't measure its outcome. You want to measure the outcome. You want to determine whether or not it worked. Evaluate the outcome. Was it helpful? Was it neutral, didn't really take any action, or was it harmful? If the solution tried was neutral or harmful, you consider trying a different solution. Remember that menu of solutions we garner in the first case? That's when you go back to the drawing board and you kind of pick out another strategy and you try it. But you want to evaluate and assess the outcome from every action. Every solution approach you take, you want to evaluate. So there are strategies for sorting and organizing. The things you're going to keep, the things you're not sure about, the things you're going to give away. You want to put them in their categories. You want to have those bins clearly defined, labeled and established. Now, what typically happens is between keep and not sure, the pile starts going that way, right? But you want to make sure that you think of, once you put it in a pile, you don't take it out until you've completely filled all the bins. That's the rule. So you can't take things out from going to keep and then put it in, I'm not sure, and take from not sure into keep. No, once you put it in there, you take it out, you look at it, you make that determination, you process it, and then you put it into a bin. You do not touch it again until you're ready to move those things out. So there have to be some rules and guidance to doing it. But that's the best way to really establish specific sorting categories and put those things in those categories. So there's some basic categories. The things you want to let go of. What is going to be critical and important is you just don't make that decision and not take action. The action is you need to move them from that time when you decide where they're going to fall into the discard category. So if there's things you're going to let go and they fall into the trash mode, you put them in the trash can. Same thing you put in the recycle can. Take it out of that place where you organize it and you put it in its appropriate bin or can. Then you determine what you're going to donate. The things you're going to donate, what we ask you to do, or ask that person to do, is to have that donation box and also have the tape ready. And once the box is filled, what do? You tape it out, tape it up, and move it out. It doesn't stay in that same place to be reviewed. There's no review. And if you're going to sell it, one of the things we ask when you're categorizing things to sell is to have your camera or your phone ready and you have all things set up. So once you decide to sell it, you take a picture, you put it on Facebook Marketplace or whatever, and you put it in a category to sell. Box it up, label it, whatever. Gotta have that tangible way of doing it, categorizing and taking action to put it in its appropriate place. The things you want to save, you also need to sort them and organize them appropriately. We say mail on assorted paper. One of the biggest challenges for most folks is they tend to look at things and be like, oh, I want to put this Bank of America in here and Bank of Wells Fargo in here, Wachovia over here. No. You don't need 15 places for bank statements, right? In today's world, even more so. Bank statement comes in in ways that you don't have to have a hard copy. You can always access your bank statement from the online banking if you do so. Clothing, toiletries, souvenirs, cleaning supplies, winter boots. You want to organize them in specific ways. I know some folks who can't determine between a winter boots, a fall boots, and a summer boots, right? It's like, I wear them different times. You want to make some tangible changes. Unless you're living in a place where it's extremely cold, you don't want to have your, padded winter boots hanging out all year throughout your home when you can put it in a certain category, take it out at a specific time where it's organized. You'll know from late October into February is when you're going to need access to that boot. So you want to make sure you're organizing your things in that way. In many instances for folks, we ask, what would be most challenging for folks in categorizing stuff? I know for me, one of the most challenging stuff for me is to organize shoes. Yeah. I haven't tell you. I call them some crossover shoes. If it's not that cool, I wear it. But yeah, it's also good for summertime. Sometimes I've got to make that distinction. Get that bin that goes click. That's winter boots. I'm not touching those. Those gone in the attic in some far off corner. I got to duck and dive to get to them. So you have to have a way of tangibly doing that. Now, and we're getting to that wrap-up stage. There's that general decision-making, the moving things to its final location, like we talked about, having things tangibly in place. So when you're organizing stuff, you have to have things really organized in a way that goes from the decision to what category is going to go into that category bin, into the place that it's going to go, either to keep or to be discarded. Quick straight process, linear process. That's what that's you don't go around in a circle. Step A, B to C. Does that make sense? Fantastic. And you have to know your resources that are available to you, right? You know where the local recycling place is. You know who's going to pick up your stuff, the Goodwill, Salvation Army, where you can sell your goods, Craigslist. So there's some examples of local resources that you can use subsequent to organizing. And to really have an organizing preparation form, right? Really gives you a way of organizing your stuff. Talk about bring your cardboard boxes up from the basement, you buy labels and markers, all the things you need to really help you organize in a meaningful, tangible way. And who to call and what their number is in that moment. Because you don't want to be like, oh, I'm going to organize this, then sometime later I'm going to call that person to come pick it up. Guess what happens if you do that? It tends to stay in the same spot, never get moved. You go through it the same night and be like, oh, I really shouldn't give her that. This, my grandmother's grandmother gave me this. Let me hold on to that. And you keep moving it right back into the pile. So you want to move beyond that. Special attention should be paid to paper items. Don't fall the trap into having too many categories. Papers probably should use about 2 categories, right? Bills and reading material. Or if you have a will and you have certain things that are important, you have them in a lockbox in a category place that they're not out there all the time among the pile. And you have your resources to ensure your papers are organized in a meaningful way. And putting things in their designated spaces. 4 simple rules. If you take it out, put it back. If you open it, close it. If you throw it out, if you throw it down, pick it up. And if you take it off, bring it up. So it's important to have some rules. And one of the rules we talk about is if you put it in that pile, you don't pick it up until you finish all the categories. Ultimately, you need to make sure that when you have done a tangible task of change action, you need to reward yourself so that you can keep fuel going, right? Only after you've sorted and organized for the designated amount of time, 30 to 60 minutes, should you reward yourself by watching TV. So go for a walk, ice cream, whatever, gelato, calling that favorite person in your life, whatever it is, you establish a clear way of rewarding yourself for meaningful action that you took to make a change. And when we're dealing with consumers, it's important for us to help them establish a reward system for themselves, particularly when we get to this point of sorting and discarding. Now, that reward should not be purchasing something new to add to the list. We ask people to reward themselves in meaningful, tangible things that can be used in that moment, right? Because we want to have a momentary, meaningful reward system. Not some reward that's going to be exponentially utilized over a period of a week. No, immediate. If you're going to have that cookie, you eat it, you bite it, you digest it right here, right now, immediately after sorting and organizing. So that's important. And there's lots of incentive theory. So as we wrap up, I want you to note that in the effort of really measuring our outcomes of this, I want you to access if possible, and you can use the link below. And I'm going to ask Crystal to put that link in, but we want to really gather your input on the learning communities that Rutgers University have facilitated over the past 5 years. And we've done a lot of work with foundational community supports. And specifically, we're looking for our feedback on most of the learning communities that we've engaged in. Our goal in this study is to really examine the impact of utilizing these learning communities to improve behavioral outcomes, providers skills and knowledge in supported housing and in supported employment. We're hoping that you'll support us in this effort, and we hope you do so by really taking this evaluation and providing us some feedback. So yes, we're technologically savvy, we're moving up in the world. If you can take a scan of that as well, it will take you to that survey link as well, or you can use the link in the chat to really provide us some feedback. We want to make sure that we are really making meaningful, tangible approaches to supporting you in your efforts to support and provide services to the people that you do. So this is going to be helpful. This is a research-oriented stuff. It's really has some fidelity and tangible stuff to it. It's anonymous, so you don't have to worry about whether or not someone is going to see your responses, but it's important for you to do so. And if you can and you have a moment, you can certainly take our regular evaluation, so we have a sense of feedback as to how each session is going. But I asked if you can, please kindly provide that to us. As is usual, we have learning application for our next meeting, which is going to be on October 24th. We ask that you try or share my categories and location form, right? How do we categorize the stuff that we're trying to discard and organize? Your preparation for organizing form and your rewards form. How do you reward yourself? And we're going to ask you to provide us some feedback on that, the next session. And our next session is really going to be focused on chapter 10. Let's go, take the action, get into it. So I want to thank you sincerely for your time. We appreciate your time and attention and participation. And today's webinar was once again hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. And I want to remind you that the slides and the recording will be available to you subsequently. Well, thank you very much. And I wish and hope that you have as much success in your efforts to support people experiencing hoarding as you are growing and evolving in this particular skill set. Look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you so much for your time.